But yeah, it's interesting how games like Deadlock, for example, unapologetically difficult, huge amount of players, but it's a multiplayer only game, which I think goes along with like your point about like how this is confusing to your perspective because you just care about the gameplay. Not every genre has to go through these hoops, but I think there's a reason for that. But it's true, like not every game is judged to this standard. Does Valorant have single player game modes? No, it doesn't have this crap, right? But why do fighting games have to do that? So I do think there's a reason for that. I think fighting games do have to do that still, but other examples of big popular competitive games have dodged that responsibility for a while. I think a part of that is just cultural context.
I also think fighting games are like RPGs where you're kind of expecting single player content at this point. It's not like a shooter where like if I boot up a Valorant, I'm just getting multiplayer. I think like the old like 2XKO tried to do it, and 2XKO was getting so much flack for not having single player stuff. Same with Street Fighter V. You know, Capcom was thinking, hey, you know, if everyone just plays online and has fun and playing against each other, people will have fun. But then so many people gave them so much flack for not having story modes and, you know, arcade modes and all that stuff. So it is weird. I feel like fighting games are they're not placed in the same category as FPS games, that FPS games could get away with that. And they're more in like an adventure game kind of realm where like, yeah, I'm expecting single player and multiplayer is there. That's cool, I guess.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by the cultural context. Here's I don't think they touched on that distinction heavily on this article. They touched on a lot of other things, but that's one thing I thought was very interesting. Why are fighting games held to that standard when other genres are not? And I think it's the cultural context of this all. We've culturally built up the skill to play first-person shooters. It's very rare for someone to have their first-person shooter be a Valorant or whatever. And at that point, there's enough exposure to it via social media and other people playing it and it being a team game. There's a lot of other ways to ease that barrier to entry if it is your first ever experience with the genre. But for the most part, we have 20, 30 years of campaign-based single-player first-person shooters. Go back to GoldenEye, man. That's where it all began. We've built up this cultural context and awareness of the genre and its mechanisms, its mechanics, its tropes, how it operates. And by the time you get to a new first-person shooter, you already have decades of experience if you're an older gamer, right? And for newer gamers, you know, they have this whole cultural awareness. They see people play it. Maybe they can hop right into the multiplayer genre and just build it from that point. But there's a lot of exposure to actually playing the game with single-player content. And I mean, you're actually playing the game. Sure, it's not like competitive shooting and you have like infinite health refills and other ways to make it easier potentially, but you're aiming, you're moving, you're shooting, you're doing the mechanics, and those translate directly into the multiplayer experience, 1-to-1, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why shooters are allowed to get away with that. Now, the Deadlock and the MOBA one is a little bit like that argument starts to fall apart a little bit, I would argue, and like for StarCraft as well. I think StarCraft 1 had some single player content as well, if I remember correctly, but I'm very bad on the history of StarCraft and MOBAs in general. Once you get into like League of Legends and all that. So those products didn't have it, but they were better free-to-play products. Like League of Legends was a great free-to-play product, and that's why it kind of kickstarted the whole MOBA genre in that direction, right? So I think that awareness of how ubiquitous League of Legends and Dota became allowed you to have a game like Deadlock because they broke through. And so fighting games, they broke through it and they peaked with Street Fighter 2 in the 90s and Tekken 3 and all that. But they haven't evolved since then, and they regressed in many ways. They regressed in their single-player content. Hopefully you enjoyed that trash talk or extra trashy clip. If you want to see the full episode that clip came from, go ahead and click the link right over here. Otherwise, YouTube thinks you might enjoy this video right here. And for the trashiest amongst you, we get the merch right over there.